morning, everybody, and welcome to our study for this evening. Before we get into our study, can we bow our heads for prayer? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this privilege and opportunity to meet and to fellowship, to worship you, and to meditate upon your word. And now, Lord, as we open your word, as we read it, and as we contemplate upon it, we pray that the Holy Spirit who inspired this word may be our teacher and our guide to give us understanding and to guide us into the truth as it is in Jesus, in whose name we do pray. Amen. Today we are going to go into the second part of our study of the seventh chapter of Daniel. Last week when I finished, I said that we're going to have 3 parts. But then when in reviewing what we covered and also what we still need to cover, we thought it best that we split it into actually a 4-part study. So tonight, instead of going on to the little horn, as I had indicated, we are going to continue to complete our study of the 4 beasts and the interpretation given in Daniel chapter 7. And then next week, we'll move on to the 3rd part, which is identifying the little horn based on the information in Daniel 7. And then we conclude our 4-part study with the judgment process. To recap, last week we looked at the 4 beasts that Daniel was shown in vision, starting with a lion with eagle wings coming out of the water, and then followed by a bear with 3 ribs in his mouth and also raised on one side. Then the bear was followed by a leopard with 4 heads and 2 pairs of wings. And then after that, there followed a beast or an animal which Daniel had never seen before and which has got no name because it was a huge and awesome beast, very powerful. It had brass nails and it had 10 horns, plus it had great iron teeth. And this beast, it was devouring and tearing to pieces and stamping the residue with its feet. Then on the head, as Daniel was looking, he saw that amongst the 10 horns, a little horn came up, which unplugged 3 horns, which fell off. And then this little horn, again, much to Daniel's astonishment, it developed, it had a mouth like the mouth of a man, and also eyes like the eyes of a man. And what's more, the mouth was speaking great and pompous things against the Most High or against God. And also this little horn was different and also stouter or bigger than the other 7 remaining horns. Then when we came to the interpretation, Daniel was also given the interpretation, and I'm going to ask Cadian to read for us the interpretation of those 4 beasts and the little horn that he saw. So I'm going to ask her to read from Daniel 7, verses 17, 23, 24, 25.
Those great beasts, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise from them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time.
Thank you. So the interpretation is quite straightforward. Those 4 beasts, including the terrible beast with no name, they represent kingdoms. And then the 10 horns that started off on the head of the 4th beast are also representing kingdoms. And then the little horn that comes up is also a different horn, and also is representing a kingdom. So as we saw last week, the four beasts and the four kingdoms that are represented by those beasts, they parallel the four metals that we saw in Daniel chapter 2, in the vision that, in the dream rather, that King Nebuchadnezzar was given by God. And if you recall, in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar was shown a statue made up of different metals with a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, abdomen and thighs of bronze, sorry, and legs of iron, which iron also continued into the feet, but now mixed with clay. And so the parallels are quite obvious. The lion represents the first kingdom, the bear represents the second kingdom, and the leopard represents the third kingdom, and then the great beast also represents the fourth kingdom. And we saw that these kingdoms were successively Babylon, represented by gold, and then Medo-Persia, silver, and then Greece, bronze, and iron, representing the Roman Empire. And the 10 toes that on the feet, they represent the 10 founding nations of Europe. And the 10 toes, they also correspond to the 10 horns that Daniel saw on the great and terrible beast. So the animals, they represent those four parallel kingdoms. So let us look at the significance of the metals that Nebuchadnezzar was shown. This is a detail that we didn't bring out because of time constraints, but those metals, they are significant. And starting with Babylon, which was represented by the gold. History tells us that gold was extensively used in the Babylonian kingdom. One of the famous and well-known Greek historians, Herodotus, when he visited Babylon, he was astonished by the amount of gold that was used to overlay walls in many buildings. And the chief god of Babylon was one called Marduk. And for him, there were 43 temples in Babylon and 55 shrines dedicated to the Marduk. And Marduk was also known as the gold god, or the god of gold. Essentially, it was made of, the statues were made of wood, but then overlaid with gold. And the biggest temple dedicated to Marduk is the Etemenanki temple, which was overlaid with gold, as the picture shows. And also his drawings and pictures, you can see that it was overlaid with gold. So gold really is a fitting symbol for the kingdom of Babylon. And in Jeremiah 51 verse 7, the Bible describes Babylon as a golden cup in the Lord's hands in one of Jeremiah's prophecies. Moving on to the next kingdom of the Medo-Persians, in Daniel 2 is described as an inferior kingdom and represented by the metal silver. And as you know, silver is less valuable than gold. But why silver was used to characterize or symbolize the Medo-Persian kingdom is that silver was used as a standard of value and also money or medium of exchange. And the Medo-Persians were noted for their extensive tax system. I'll ask Kadian, can you please read Ezra chapter 4, verse 18, and also Daniel 6, verses 1 and 2.
Let it now be known to the king that, if this city is built and the walls completed, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, and the king's treasury will be diminished. Daniel 6, verses 1 to 2. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 124 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss.
Yes. So in Ezra, this was when the Israelites, after the Babylonian captivity, when they were trying to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, and the surrounding tribes were opposed to the building, Sanballat and company. They were writing lies to the king. They're saying, look, if you allow Jerusalem to be rebuilt, these people are going to rebel and they are not going to pay tax. And then in Daniel 6, Darius, when he took over, when he captured Babylon, then he set up a taxation system. And as we know that the Medo-Persian kingdom had 128 provinces, according to the book of Esther. And these two here are samples of some silver coins that were used during the time of Artaxerxes and Darius III. So the Persians, they used the silver extensively as a way of accounting and the medium of exchange. Moving on to the Bronze Empire, which is the Greek Empire. The Greeks, they used bronze mainly in the culture sphere. When Alexander created his Greek Empire, it ushered in what is called the Hellenistic period, which was characterized by and spread of Greek art, literature, and language throughout the empire. And bronze was liked, or it was favored because of its tensile strength, but it is an alloy, and also its reflective surface, and also ability to capture the fine detail that was used for dynamic compositions and displays of the human body and vivid expressions, as you can see from these two images. They even put in a marble and even copper to to make the eyes look so realistic. So the use of bronze is particularly in this in the field of art, literature, and language by the Greeks, served to make bronze a fitting symbol for the Greek Empire. And archaeology has produced or revealed dozens of statues, and some are still even in existence today because of the longevity of bronze. And they're producing thousands portraits of rulers, citizens, and images of gods and their heroes, and also even their popular athletes. So Greece was represented by the bronze metal. And then coming to the Roman Empire, which was represented by iron. And the Romans, according to history, they are known for their intensified use of iron in producing and implements and arms of war. And the Roman military, it was very effective thanks to their chariots and iron weaponry. And as the picture shows, a typical Roman soldier with his helmet made of iron, and the armor, and then the sword and the shield as well, and the legion of Roman soldiers marching to war. And as we know, iron is the strongest of all the metals in that image. And so that also a fitting symbol for Rome, because Rome turned out to be the longest empire to come on the scene in Earth's history. And as we know, as the image showed, that the iron actually continues right up until the end, although in the feet is now mixed with clay. Still, the Roman Empire existed as a single entity for 600 plus years until 476 AD, when it was overrun eventually by what they call the barbarians tribes, and then it was broken up into the different nations that exist, some of which are still existing today. So the metals, they were actually a fitting symbol for these kingdoms when we look at the characteristics of those empires when we go to secular history. And then in 476 AD, after a series of years and attacks, the Roman Empire finally broke up, and out of its ashes emerged the 10 founding nations of Europe: the Alemanni, Franks, the Burgundians, Suevi, the Lombards, the Visigoths, Anglo-Saxons, Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals. And that initially they were in these places, but as we are going to see, they eventually, their map actually eventually changed. And when Rome broke down, rather, this is where the initial locations of the 10 tribes. And as you can see, the beginning, Switzerland now is a much smaller country. Alemannia, which is Germany, present-day Germany, is a much bigger country. France, that's France, and then in the Anglo-Saxons in England, and the Visigoths, this is the Spanish, and the Suebi in Portugal. And as you can see here, we have the Heruli Ostrogoths, but then and the Vandals also. But then when you look at present-day Europe, these three, they no longer exist, and these are the three horns that were unplugged by the little horn that came up among the 10 horns on the terrible beast. And so when the Ostrogoths and the Heruli and Vandals were destroyed or annihilated, then the Lombards eventually expanded, and they now occupy present-day Italy. And so these three, they no longer exist. They were destroyed, and I think the remnants were actually absorbed into the remaining victorious nations. And so Daniel 7 verse 24 tells us that, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. So the little horn actually overran these 3, and then essentially realigned the mapping of the nations of Europe. Until in the present day, we no longer have those 3, they're now missing. Now, the other information given about this beast was that, these beasts, they are going to be, to have their dominion taken away, and yet their lives were to be prolonged for a season in time. So I'll ask Kadian read Daniel chapter 7 verses 8, 11, and 12 to give us the context of this verse 12 that we are going to unpack.
I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in his horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And I watched then, because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beast, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time.
Thank you. So the kingdoms, they came and they've gone. They're no longer in existence. So this is what is meant by their dominion being taken away. So their political power or hegemony is now a thing of the past. And yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So what does this mean? So what this means that when you look at history, we find, we get from archaeology and study of ancient documents that although Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Roman Empire are no longer in existence, there's still some vestiges or some characteristics that are still in existence today, that are still impacting even our everyday life. And so their lives are being prolonged in 3 main spheres, that is in the religious sphere, in the cultural sphere, and also in the natural science study, that is your maths, your chemistry, physics, etc. So I'm just going to give examples, okay, from the 3 spheres in which the lives of the previous kingdoms are being preserved. It's not exhaustive, but then it's really left for interest for those who are interested in history and archaeology, but there's far much more vestiges from those kingdoms that is still existing. So starting with Babylon, the religion of Babylon was essentially sun worship, and the chief god was Marduk, also known as Baal or Baal. And students of the Old Testament, they immediately recognize that, Baal was one of the chief issues and problems that gave the children of Israel a lot of problems, and also resulted in them going into captivity because of this religion. So it was so influential that it affected and impacted the people of God. And the Marduk was the chief god, and also Ishtar and Tammuz, who is mentioned also in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. And coming to the cultural aspect, one of the key things from Babylon is the codifying of the law. And Hammurabi is one who is known for his code of law, which governed society. And then in the natural sciences, which is perhaps my interest as well, is that the Babylonians are the ones who invented or created the sexagesimal numeral system, which is base 60. Quite complicated, but this is from which we derive the system of 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour, and the 360 degrees in a circle. They also developed the positional notation in arithmetic, and then as well as geometry and astronomy. Remember, when Jesus was born, the wise men from the East were actually Chaldeans, and because of their study in astronomy, they were able to notice, and to identify that there is a star that has never been seen before, because of their expertise in astronomy. Coming to the Medo-Persians, their religion was mainly the worship of Mithra, who was the Iranian god, essentially a monotheistic religion. And he was a god of sun, justice, contract, and war. Okay, so you can see even the impact of the code of law from Hammurabi. But perhaps one of the most important and lasting impact from the Medo-Persian religion is the concept of the soul. And this concept is one that was picked up by the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle and the other philosophers. And right now is still a very important aspect of many religions, including Christianity itself. So it really started with the Medo-Persians, the concept of the soul in the human body. And in the cultural sphere, the Medo-Persians, they invented the alphabets. Even this game called the backgammon, and as we have already mentioned, an extensive text system, plus, among other things, sulfuric acid for those who are interested in chemistry. And in the natural sciences, they invented or discovered algebra and such abstract concepts as reduction, completion, moving equations from one side to another, changing the signs, etc. If you remember your algebra, and also balancing, crossing out like terms on both sides of the equal sign. So algebra as a discipline of mathematics was actually invented, no, not invented, but discovered by the Persians. And then coming to the Greeks, the Greeks are definitely known for their polytheistic religion. We have the pantheon of gods, which were also adopted by the Romans later on and given different names. So the Greek mythology is a well-known subject and still persisting even up to this day. And in the cultural sphere, we have the philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, etc. And Alexander the Great actually was mentored by Aristotle. And the Greeks are the ones who also coined the term or the concept of democracy. And then, of course, when it comes to the architectural styles, they're known for the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders of architectural styles that apparently are still influencing even architectural genres to this day. And then, of course, in the sports as well, the Olympics, as well as we have already mentioned in arts, literature, and sport. Then in the natural sciences, the Greeks were also developed further the subjects of geometry, Euclidean geometry, which were used extensively in astronomy. And then, of course, the well-known Pythagoras, who developed or discovered abstraction, which is essentially the concept of creating models to abstract reality and to pick on only the key things to explain complex things. And then also the concept of generalization and deductive reasoning. So this was the contribution of the Greeks, and as you can see, even up to now, all these things, they are still very much part of our civilization. And then lastly, the Roman Empire. The Romans, they, as I said, they adopted the polytheistic religion of the Greeks. They adopted their gods, they gave them their names, and so we also have a pantheon of Roman gods, but essentially they're just the same as the Greek gods. And in the civil sphere, the Romans, they were known for civil engineering. They constructed roads for quick movement of their military and trade, and as well as they are known for the famous Roman arches in architecture, and also the aqueducts that were used, constructed to bring water from water sources into their cities. And they also adopted and modified the Greek architectural styles. And those who are in the field, they can go deeper into this subject and, identify the vestiges of these architectural styles dating from way back during the Roman and the Greek empires. And then lastly, in the natural sciences, the Roman numerals, of course, and then, of course, the Latin alphabet that we still use in many of the Western and Germanic languages. So as we can see, when we look around, our civilization is still very much in the 21st century, still using some of the concepts and things that were developed or discovered and refined by those kingdoms. So in a way, their lives are prolonged. They're still around with us, although their political hegemony has been removed. But then by far, the biggest impact from the previous kingdoms is in the spiritual or religious sphere. As when we go to Revelation, the key issue at the end of time before Christ comes is going to be spiritual. And next week, when we look at the little horn, we're going to see how some of its characteristics, they actually did not start at that time when during the Roman Empire, when the little horn developed, but actually it goes, some of the characteristics and practices, they go all the way back to these previous empires. So they are still with us, and ultimately it's the religious sphere that is going to have the most impact when we come to the end time events in the Earth's history. And here, this is just a chart showing the two lists of gods between the Roman and Greek gods. The Romans adopted everything, and these are their responsibilities, as if you might call it, war, hunting, love, underworld, and all these kind of things. And the names are also even familiar. The names of our planets and the days of the year, and it's even some months of the year. So it's still with us. And even the Greek mythology itself, we might think that, this was a thing of the past, but it was interesting. I saw this on the internet. This is from the 21st century. And this guy calls himself a faithful servant to the gods of Olympus. And so I'm going to ask Cadian to read what this guy says about his religion. This is in the 21st century.
My religion is known as Hellenism and is a polytheistic reconstructionist faith dedicated to the religious practices of ancient Greece. Though, being half Italian, I also add a little bit of Roman flair to how I venerate the gods. I was initially baptized as an Episcopalian and stoutly firm in my faith as a child. But as I grew older and started to look into what caused the Dark Ages in Europe and read further in depth about the Crusades, I quickly began to realize that I had been lied to by the church all this time, and that was something I could never forgive them for. How could a perfect God create so much imperfection? Why should anyone dictate who I should worship and how I practice my faith? My parents thought me my parents thought me insane when I told them, even though my father was far more sympathetic to my cause than my mother. So I decided to find a new faith, one that had all freedom of worship in religions, like Shintoism, but didn't have all the strictness of the Abrahamic faiths. Having loved Greek mythology ever since I was a little boy, I studied and researched more about the ancient Greek and Roman religious rites, holidays, and ceremonies. That's when I realized that the Olympian gods were far more reasonable than just one god. Why place myself in the hands of a deity that rules a tyrant, when I could show thanks and favor to a democratic pantheon of gods and goddesses? I also was fond of reason and science, and I knew that these were the gods of my paternal ancestors from southern Italy. When I turned 18, I finally left the church for good and have been openly showing my favor and thanks to the gods for their magnanimous and just rule. I never looked back, never had to, never will. All in all, it was a good decision and it did wonders for me in the end.
Yes, those are the words of a 21st adult living right now at this time. So the religions of the past, even though the kingdoms are gone, they still are lingering on. So this is how their lives have been prolonged. So this is just to show that, the influences right from Babylon, they are going to continue right up until the end when Christ comes to put an end to all these things and usher in his everlasting kingdom. So in conclusion, we have established that the metals in the animals, they are significant. And the previous kingdoms are still influence is still with us today in the different spheres of our life and civilization. And the complete eradication will only be achieved by Christ, starting with his second coming. Another thing that we've also actually established is what I call the historicism key. That is, when we look at prophecy as an event on a timeline, when we look back, we actually confirm that the prophecies were actually accurate because history gives us events on a timeline. And with archaeological evidence, we can verify that, yes, the prophecies were correct and accurate. Because if you think about it, the first prophecy in Daniel 2 came during the time of the Babylonian kingdom. That was before the Medo-Persian kingdom came on the scene. That was almost like 60 years into the future. And then if you add on the 300 years time when the Greek Empire came on the scene, you find that the prophecies from Medo-Persian kingdom to the Roman kingdom, they were given hundreds of years before, and history is confirming and testifying that those prophecies were correct. And so, using the same key, we can also use to verify even the future events, because as we are going to see, some of the characteristics of the little horn, some have already been fulfilled, but then some are still in the future. And when you go to the book of Revelation, there are still some prophecies that are still to be fulfilled. but then using history, we can use to identify the prophesied events and also the entities as they unravel. So historicism gives us a very useful and also a protective guardrail against interpretations or false interpretations of prophecy. And as we are going to be using this key time and time again as we continue our study in the book of Daniel. And so next week, we are going to move on to identify the little horn based on the information that we have gleaned, and also the key of historicism, to look at back at what has taken place in history, and also what is happening currently, and also what is to happen in the future. And also using historicism, in the book of Daniel has got 5 time prophecies, that is prophecies linked with specific dates and time periods. And the 3 of those time prophecies, they are the fundamental and the key to the plan of salvation, and also linked to the Messiah and also the end time events of this world. So may the Lord bless us as we go through this week and as we prepare for part 3 in our study of Daniel chapter 7.